So let's bring the Dark Gods and embroidered out super soldiers together and see what they can do. Just how many mortal wounds can one Master of Executions deal in one fight phase? Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought it would be fun to do a bit of a general Chaos combos video, putting together a few of the nastiest things in Codex Chaos Space Marines, and seeing what sort of crazy damage, durability or utility we can get out of them. There's a whole bunch of interesting things in the book to unpack, a bunch of layering special rules, tons of stratagems and mark abilities, and of course a whole bunch of legions with their own special tricks to take things even further. Let's jump in though and take a look at some of the more obvious strong combos and talk about why they work. First up, something that I did notice was a potentially interesting thing when the book dropped was the idea of taking rubric marines in the army, and it does appear that you can have about the scariest Warpflamers going, due to the Chaos Space Marines getting the Let the Galaxy Burn rule, which massively amps up flame weapons. The standard Chaos Space Marines can field units of Thousand Suns rubric marines. They field them as an elite's choice rather than a troops, and the interesting thing about them is the Warpflamer, 24 points for an assault d6 12-inch gun, at strength 4, AP 2 and damage 1. It's quite a good generalist profile, and what's more, it got pretty cheap with the new Rubric Marine datasheet change. It's down to 24 points now. The reason they're good is that they get Let the Galaxy Burn, which basically gives you an extra 2 shots to any flame weapons in the army. Flame weapons are defined as any weapon that has the word flame in its profile, so Bale Flamer, Heavy Flamer, and that would work with Warp Flamer. So basically per Rubric Marine you're getting 5 or 6 auto hits on the enemy at strength 4, AP 2, damage 1. That's really quite vicious stuff for the points cost on at least a reasonably durable platform. And if you did want to absolutely hose the enemy in damage output, you could spend 2 CP for Veterans of the Long War to give them +1 to wounds. What makes them potentially even more scary though is that they can use warp time to get close pretty easily. The new warp time from Dark Hereticus was nerfed a bit in that you can't charge after you've double moved, but you can still shoot. It means that you can still deliver the damage of close range weapons into range, and these guys have about some of the most threatening close range weapons in the entire codex. What's more is that they can even use warp time within the squad. The aspiring sorcerer can take a power from the Dark Hereticus discipline, and the squad doesn't have the cultist or legionaries keyword thing, so I believe it means that they can use any of the powers on the table. In the movement phase you can still advance, so 6 plus d6 inches, then use the warp time move from the squad's own Psyker for another 6-inch movement. That's going to work out at around about 15-inch worth of movement, and 12-inch of the Flamers means they have a 27-inch threat range, which is very long indeed for Flamers. You get roughly 55 hits at strength 4, AP 2 and damage 1 for 255 points. It is 255 as you have to buy the Mark of Tzeentch, which isn't even all that bad as it gets you to ignore a failed save and probably save a Rubric's life at some stage. And the crazy damage winds up at something like 37 dead guardsmen, 7 dead space marines with armor of contempt, or something like 12 wounds to a toughness 7 vehicle, which should go up to around about 18 if you use Veterans of the Long War. Even that's oversimplifying a bit though. You could add in a couple of Soul Reaper cannons if it made more sense, though you wouldn't want to advance, and I guess the aspiring sorcerer would only get a warp flame pistol, so I guess his attacks would be a tiny bit weaker. Still though, there's a massive amount of damage output and threat range out of a squad. I could see a contingent of Warpflame Rubric Marines being really quite popular, and there might well be other synergies with stratagems and things from certain legions that I'm overlooking. They don't get OBSEC here, but they are at least fairly tanky as well with all this dust. Next up is what I think is probably a rules mistake on Games Workshop's part. I have seen some people talking about the possibility of gamey Terminator charges, basically using some shenanigans from the Master of Possession to kill one Terminator and resurrect one closer to the enemy, which means that you get a very short charge indeed. As best I can tell, this doesn't seem to contradict any core rulebook rules. If I have missed anything, then please let me know down in the comments and I'll post a correction. This does feel a bit more in the region of rules abuse rather than rules combos, and I feel like it might get FAQ'd if it does work. The idea is to have a Terminator unit deep strike next to a Master of Possession, just outside of 9 inches of their intended charge target, and then make use of the Master of Possession's Sacrificial Dagger rule, which he can use to opt to inflict D3 mortal wounds on an infantry unit within 3 inches to get a +2 chance to his casting. Normally I think it's not the most overwhelming trade-off. You can't use it on cultists, so usually you'd be killing around about 20 points of your own models, or for a +2 to cast buff, which is nice but not really worth that much every turn. Here though, the idea is actually to try and kill a Terminator, so they're basically just deep striked in, you've attempted to kill a Terminator, and he can use it twice in the same turn as well. 2d3 mortal wounds is likely to kill a Terminator 8 out of 9 times. It doesn't really matter what you cast on the first one. You could use Mutated Invigoration to give them toughness 5 maybe, but the second spell that you cast should be Pact of Flesh, as even if you kill the model with the Sacrificial Dagger before this one goes off, I believe it would die before it's manifested, and then you can heal one injured model in the squad and also resurrect a model that you can put closer to the enemy target that you want to charge. If you put it in maximal unit coherency, that'd be plus 2 inches plus the width of the model's base, so typically that would reduce a 9-inch charge down to a 5-inch one. That'd be a charge going from something that's only going to happen very rarely into one that's almost guaranteed, and stupidly reliable if you've got a command point reroll spare. After you've moved the Terminators, then the coherency shouldn't matter, as you can regain coherency after you've made that charge. Overall, it is a bit of a silly combo. Arguably, it might not be the most powerful thing in the world, seeing as it makes you make use of a really powerful spell, and if you fail the spell or get it denied, then it just doesn't work altogether anyway. Still though, I can't really help but get a funny mental image from it, as some guy unknowingly gets sacrificed to the Dark Gods, only to be brought back a moment later, as he's urged towards fighting and destroying the enemy's elites. Maybe sometimes the gods of chaos send you some mixed messages. Next up, if you want a cheap and brutal champion of chaos, the Master of Executions really is looking quite effective for 65 points in the elite slot. He doesn't really give you any other buffs to your other units, but having a character that you can just have focus on being a massive countercharge threat isn't too bad, plus he's got a very big heroic intervention, which means he's quite good for defending units. For his cheap points cost, he gets 6 attacks at strength 7, AP 3 and damage 2, all hitting on 2s, and the axe has the rather unusual special rule of granting 2 mortal wounds on 6s to hit. Instead of inflicting any normal damage, you don't need to roll to wound or anything. It means that if this guy gets a full rerolls to hit source, say for example Word Bearers on the charge, or if he happens to be near a Dark Apostle for example, then you don't just have to reroll the failed hits, you can reroll any of his hits and try and fish for those all-important 6s. It actually makes more sense to do this, as most of his hits are going to be hitting anyway, and if you get those 6s, it's a really big deal. You then bypass the wounds check and the save check. The extra hits on 6s for Wanton Slaughter don't trigger that rule, but all the more reason to fish for 6s as you just get some more stacked damage. If you can reroll all hits on this guy, say if you're Word Bearers, then you average around about 3 or 4 mortal wounds per fight, obviously coming parcelled in sets of 2, depending on how many 6s you roll. Then beyond that, you also land 3 or 4 more hits at that strength 7 profile. Against enemy elites, he should at least have a reasonable chance of dealing as much damage as his points cost in a single turn. To be honest, it might just be best to keep him cheap. He does what he does very well for the points cost. He can heroic intervene to protect squads, be a countercharge threat, or just lend a hand with your advancing forces. But if he did give him a Relic and Warlord trait, he can potentially get even scarier. That Exalted Possession trait is a fun one for the Word Bearers. If you happen not to be using it elsewhere, then for 1 CP, you could get him a 4+ invul, and the crazy boost of +1 strength, attack, wound, and 2-inch movement. Then say if we were going the absolute whole hog in the combo, we could give him a Lock of the Black, make his axe do mortal wounds on every successful wound roll, and between that and strength 8 from the Exalted Possession, you'd average around about 7 mortal wounds on your enemy with Word Bearers rerolls, anything that was toughness 7 or less. After wound rolls, chase that down as well with another 3 saves or so at AP 3 damage 2, and he could be pretty reliably taking big chunks out of units or wiping out entire weaker squads. It just seems quite fun to have this guy as such a cheap little beatstick in the middle of the army, something the opponent really can't ignore, as he will absolutely wreck face if he gets his hands on your units. Next up was one that we talked about in a previous video, resurrecting obliterators with the Master of Possession. Again, this one uses Pact of Flesh, which I do think is probably the most auto-include thing out of the entire Space Marine Codex. It'll just return massive amounts of points to any damaged Chaos units every single turn. It's a Warp Charge 5 and can either resurrect a Core or Demonkin model with all its wounds remaining, and then also heals another model in the squad another D3 wounds. You could use it to get more Legionaries back on the table, set up Terminators again, set up Possessed, and again you could potentially put them at the front of the unit to make their charges smaller. Pretty powerful if they're trying to charge across the board, and it's also interesting that you could use this to heal wounds on Abaddon, which is a really big thing seeing as he can only take 3 wounds per phase. As I mentioned last time though, perhaps the single craziest thing is resurrecting those obliterators. I'd say the models are okay for the points. They actually seem to be almost as good in combat as they are at range these days. Maybe not super outstanding for 90 points, but if you're getting free ones each turn, then it seems like a massively good deal. They've got 5 wounds saving on a 2+ with Armour of Contempt. If you park a unit of 3 of them in light cover, it seems very unlikely that the opponent's going to be able to wipe the entire unit in one turn. And if the opponent does manage to injure but not destroy the squad, then you could easily generate 90 points worth of model for one cast, potentially also healing another 2 wounds on another one, theoretically 126 points worth of Obliterator returned to the board. It is pretty insane when the Master of Possession himself only costs 105 points, so in theory you've won on points for him then and there. Never mind the fact that he can cast other spells like Warp Marked for +1 to wound for the Obliterators, or +1 toughness if he wants to be all about durability. I think there's a lot of tempting targets, but having Pact of Flesh around at least somewhere in the army seems almost a no-brainer. Lastly, I'm returning to Terminators once more. As the biggest, meatiest and scariest core unit, I have seen a fair few people theorising about making them excessively tough, and I think arguably if you do stack multiple character buffs on them, they might be the single toughest Terminator unit in all of 9th edition now. 10 Chaos Terminators would cost you 330 points with the accursed weapons and the combi bolters, a bit more if you want to upgrade to some damage upgrades, things like Power Fist, combi weapons, or Reaper autocannons. I'd certainly want to give them a mark of one sort or another. Mark of Slanesh seems pretty excellent if you're willing to support them with a Psyker, though if not, both Zinch and Nurgle add some nice durability, and they do unlock their own support options. First up, I think perhaps the single most powerful and efficient buff is the Black Rune of Damnation. This one is a Chaos Space Marine relic that you can just buy in for 1 command point on a squad champion, and it just casually gives the entire squad a -1 to wound while that champion is alive. I'm not really sure who thought that was in any way balanced against the melee damage relics, all of which are kind of okay but not enormously outstanding. -1 to wound would be a great stratagem to have if it was just baked into the unit and it costs 1 command point per use. Never mind the fact that you can effectively just buy it here for 1 CP, and then it lasts you all game long, making your squad extra tanky. Again, I feel like this is probably so good as to be an auto-include in the vast majority of Chaos lists. If you don't have it on Terminators, then something like Possessed or even Standard Legionaries seem like other great options. Then the Chaos Codex has an absolute ton of other decent things that you can stack on Terminators to make them even more tough. The Dark Apostles' Illusory Supplication seems great. That means that hit rolls of 1 to 3 always fail against them, and you can't re-roll hit rolls either. Both of those are pretty great debuffs, to be honest. The majority of armies in 40k tend to hit on a 3+, plus re-rolls to hit are a really common source of buff, and getting rid of both is huge. Then you can go with the Psychic support, say with again a Master of Possession. Mutated Invigoration for Toughness 5 is a really big deal against certain things like Strength 8, and having extra toughness combines really nicely with -1 to wound. I think that the 5+ Feel No Pain from Delightful Agonies for Slanesh will be a very popular pick, and as you could probably say for just about every single unit that it could affect, again Pact of Flesh will be excellent with this. If you've got to choose through massive multiple layers of defences to bring down Terminators, it's going to be all the more painful when they just resurrect themselves straight back onto the board. Again, plenty of legions can add their own twist on this. Maybe if you weren't going for Illusory Supplication, then the Baleful Icon of the Word Bearers could be fun. That one again just turns off basically any enemy rerolls against the unit. But perhaps the Iron Warriors can create one of the tankiest Terminator lines. They've got access to a -1 damage stratagem, which is pretty amazing. Ignore wound rerolls baked into their Legion trait, and they can also acquire Obsec as well via a Warlord trait if they want. That can be a good way to make all of this stack's durability meaningful. The sheer amount of tankiness here is really quite insane. If you put these buffs together, then in theory you've got 3 wounds at toughness 5, no hit or wound rerolls, -1 to wound, and hit rolls of 1 to 3 always fail, which will usually be a -1 to hit or maybe even better. A 2+ save with Armour of Contempt, plus you might be able to get light cover, and capped off with a 5+ Feel No Pain. To be honest, I'm not sure how many things you'd really need the -1 damage against. I suppose it could even have you tanking things like D3+3 damage shots if you roll well. Just to highlight the truly insane maths on this, just to kill literally 2 Terminators, you'd need 324 bolt rifle hits on average. It's so low mainly because they'd be wounding on 6s, toughness 5 with a -1 to wound debuff. Otherwise it'd be around about 21 plasma hits, again with hit rolls of 1 to 3 failing. and that'd go up significantly to around 31 if they happen to be in light cover. Even dedicated anti-tank weapons fall down against these guys. You need 15 Dark Lance hits even to down 2 Terminators, which is really quite insane given the massive AP and damage. In general, you then get into the point where it's just probably not worth firing at the Terminators in the first place, and you basically need to just play around and ignore them and destroy the rest of the army and win on objectives instead. Obviously this isn't a small combo, probably being somewhere in the region of 500 to 600 points, and it does have downsides compared with the other things that you could bring. Still though, pretty immense and intimidating, not nice to have a massive durable and dangerous Terminator squad bearing down on you. So anyway, I think we'll leave that there for this video. Let me know what you make of the combos, how effective you think they'd be in game, or any other really cool things that you've noticed that you can do with the Chaos Codex that you think might see some play. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k stuff coming, including plenty more to come for Codex Chaos Space Marines. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.